Hey everybody, Ben here. Before we dive into today's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce you to Dagish Academy's Phosphine Certification Program. Our video-based interactive program is one of the most comprehensive courses available on the topic of phosphine fumigations, and we cover everything you need to know from initial inspections and bidding all the way to the aeration and deactivation process at the end. And you'll also learn all about pest identification, calculating dosages, sealing the structure, and so much more. So if you're interested in learning more about this course, please reach out to us at training@dagishamerica.com. And hey, if you mention the podcast in your email, you'll receive a coupon code for 25% off the purchase price. Yeah, I said that right, 25% off the purchase price. So we look forward to hearing from you, and happy training. Now, on to the podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to Dagish America Presents. I'm Ben Harrell, host of the podcast, and as always, I'm so happy to have the opportunity to talk to you about the industry that I work in. Last episode, we discussed protecting stored agricultural commodities from insects through the use of grain protectants. And if you haven't had an opportunity to listen to it, I highly suggest you do. On this final episode of the season, we'll be talking about the future of stored product pest control. And to help explain some of those new challenges and discuss the tools we'll use to combat them, I've invited Jeff Waggoner from FSS to join me on the podcast. So, please help me welcome Jeff to the podcast. Jeff, how are you doing today?
Awesome. Better than I deserve, Ben.
Well, that's good to hear. So I know you've been a guest on the podcast before, but for anybody who may have not heard your episode in previous seasons, if you could just do me a favor and just kind of let all of us know a little bit about yourself, that'd be terrific.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Indiana, still live in Indiana, and I was brought up as a farmer's son and got a lot of good experience that way, and went to Purdue University and studied industrial design. And then I started with FSS through a friend of mine who was in entomology, and Dave Miller, the founder of FSS, was always really close with the entomology department at Purdue University. And, through that relationship, I was invited to work for FSS just part-time, doing some fumigation prep and working on sealing crews and things like that. And, I enjoyed it, and it was plenty of work, plenty of hours. And as a college kid who was limited on finances, I found that attractive. And so after college, I was invited to come work for them full time. So that officially in 95, I guess, started working for FSS. I started part-time in, I think, 93. So just around that 30-year mark now. I guess I can't call it officially 30 years. And then, I had various roles within FSS too. I did, IPM technician stuff. And of course, fumigation was always kind of something I gravitated towards. I just found it a little more satisfying, I guess, than the routine service part of it. I guess you could separate the two if that way, I guess. And then just, I was given opportunity after opportunity there, and still here. I've been just kind of helping second generation ownership now. And Pete has kind of taken the helm there from Dave a few years ago, and just working with him to help grow the business and create opportunity for others that I was fortunate enough to have. So I feel very blessed to work, at one place and be as satisfied here as I have been for as long as I have. And yeah, just, really blessed in that regard. And we'll see how many more years, but hopefully I got a few left in me and a lot I can hopefully share with some others, and again, create for them, and a good experience for them and customers alike. So,
yeah, it's definitely been a wonderful career, especially staying at the same place for that long. I mean, that's just a testament to how well that company's ran, and I think they're very lucky to have you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So,
yeah.
And Dagish is with you as well. If we're going to exchange pleasantries, I think you've certainly always been, even in your previous employee, you just were always pleasant to talk to. Someone who enjoys what they do, you can tell, and And you got a great thing going with Degish, and we enjoy working with them as
Oh, well,
well.
thank
So,
you so much. I
yeah,
appreciate that, Jeff. It's very
absolutely.
kind words.
Thank you.
So, as we discussed off air, this season we've kind of talked about, alternative treatments to fumigation. We all know that, fumigation is a great tool to have in the toolbox, and it's one that we use on a pretty regular basis, but it's not always the first tool that you want to grab out of that toolbox. There's a lot of other things that we can use too. And so we've been talking about the IPM approach a lot this season. And I kind of wanted to round off the season just kind of talking to you about the future of IPM, the future of, non-fumigation treatments in the United States.
Mhm.
So I kind of just wanted to start out by asking you about some of the challenges that you think that we may be facing in the future, regulatory challenges, pest control challenges, availability of chemical challenges, things of that nature. Anything that you think we may be facing in the future as far as a challenge goes in our industry.
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint because I look back at fumigation. Of course, those that are not in the business, I don't think realize how much fumigation touches. Whether it's global trade and protecting ecosystems, down to food safety and protecting residences and residents, workers and bystanders. I mean, fumigation touches a lot of people, and pest management touches on a lot. I think we hear a lot now about environmental concerns, and we're pretty limited on the molecules that we have at our disposal already. I hate to think that they're going to continue to scrutinize to the extent that they take away very effective molecules, things that work very efficiently as a pesticide with limited environmental impact, at least at a negligible amount to where it still does a good job in controlling the pest and what it was originally designed to do, which kind of defines a good fumigant and a good pesticide, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're going to continue to see some scrutiny to that effect, and I know there's some ongoing research with alternative molecules, but they certainly come. Some of those things come with a price tag, whether it's concerns over toxicity to applicators or the environment alike. So those are all things we're going to have to weigh as we kind of continue to trend down. I know there's a lot of talk about sustainability in pest control. I know California has some initiatives that they're looking at to scrutinize the use of pesticides and how they're going to refine pest management. And it's not, people California gets a bad rap a lot of times, but I think it'd be irresponsible not to always look. And the rodenticides, for example, and I think rightfully so, are scrutinized pretty heavy because the industry standard, even as from an IPM approach, was just to kind of come in and pardon me if I'm getting off base a little bit, but I think it brings up a good point here
Yeah. Yeah.
is, rodenticide were just that was something that you went in and replaced and used every week, regardless of whether you had activity or not. You've got the station set up outside a facility, and whether you put in one block or two blocks or whatever your directive was, that's kind of what people did. And these things would get eaten by all kinds of, ants and slugs and all kinds of things visited those bait boxes. And you really didn't know what was going on, yet you had a rodenticide that was readily available all the time and that you went in and just applied blindly. There's no other pesticide that I know that you're just going in and applying like that. So it's gotten scrutinized pretty heavily. So from an environmental standpoint, yeah, we're going to face some there. The economic impact is certainly present as well. Just the overall cost of some fumigants. And, even though by comparison to a facility that has to shut down production is still, I think, relatively small on a percentage basis. A lot of facilities are, producing millions of dollars worth of product a day. So it's not always easy to shut down to do fumigation. The fumigation costs, again, might be negligible, but it's not, if you're looking at it all in price, I think taking a more integrated approach and looking at other things is going to continue to be important. Good collaboration. I've always said you got to communicate. You got to be a good customer. If you're going to bring
Yeah.
in someone and ask them to tell me what my pest problems or help me solve my problems, it's not an easy thing when you're your own worst enemy. If you don't
Yeah.
keep your own house in order, it's hard for me to come in and help you get that cleaned up from a pest perspective. So I think good collaboration on that. As far as the regulations go, that's where I could see some real benefits just from like I say, the regulatory perspective. So EPA's, different administrations have different outlooks on it, and there may be different agendas. Even states, some of the states now are starting to pick it up and make it very challenging, if not impossible, to do fumigation in the states. So, or in their respective states. So, I don't know how expansive that's going to be moving forward, but it's certainly very real in certain states and becoming obvious in some others that it's going to progress. So.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that you just said. I think one thing that's pretty interesting to me is, as the regulatory requirements have kind of restricted our ability to continue to utilize the tools that we have and the way that we have become accustomed to using them, I
Mhm.
think, as that's changed and merged, I think it's really kind of pushed our industry to find not just alternative chemicals and molecules, but alternative methods to use or different ways for us to be able to use the molecules and the tools that we currently have. And so there's been this huge, in my opinion, there's been this huge influx of innovation in our industry. And I mean, it's constantly innovating, but hopefully you agree with me here, but I think that I've seen more innovation in our industry in, say, the last 5 to 10 years that I think I have in the last 20 years. And that's exciting to me. Now, it's a challenge too. I don't want to make it sound like, it hasn't been a challenge. Anytime that regulatory restrictions come in, it really pushes us to think outside the box and try to come up with alternative ways to accomplish the same goal that we always have, which is keeping our food supply safe. But the innovation is invigorating, but it's equally frustrating because we always have to keep finding new, innovative ways of doing things.
Yeah, the fumigators are a pretty innovative group just by nature anyway. If
Yeah.
we're finding like-minded people. It's the DIY type people that like to problem solve because just when you think you've got a plan together to kind of go after a facility on a long holiday weekend, there's definitely always something that gets in the way of that. So you have to be a little bit creative, you have to be innovative, and I think I agree with you. I think over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, whether it's an objective of yours, I mean, that FSS has a very innovative, that's one of our core values, is to innovate and try different things. And as a small company, we have the flexibility and the freedom to be able to do some of that. But just overall, I think innovation in the industry is something that's inherent to those that are doing fumigation work. So I would definitely agree with you there.
Yeah. And I think it's just flatly to state it. I mean, I think it's made us a lot better at our jobs. That forced innovation has definitely made us better at what we do.
Absolutely, absolutely. We used to, I would say in the milling industry, for example, and even the food processing, we don't fumigate a lot of food processors like we used to anymore. And in the milling industry, we're more looking at the systems now from a fumigation approach rather than just holistic and entire facility fumigations. We still do some, but there's a lot of new flour mills out there, a lot of new concrete slip form flour mills where the bugs aren't in the floor anymore, in the laminated oak flooring. So that's changed a lot. The equipment has gotten better from a sanitation engineering perspective. But the insects still, they're persistent and they're going to end up in the systems. I will say some, grain protectants also are having a bit of an impact, a longer term impact sometimes in those operations. We've got some innovative things going on there that we're pretty excited to see how that rolls out.
Oh yeah.
Just, from an IPM perspective. But yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think, out of necessity also, we've gotten better. So and that's not a bad thing, but we have seen growth in rodent activity in a lot of distribution centers. And if you've driven around a lot of the Midwestern cities, just because of their geographic location, you've seen 1 million square foot buildings go up overnight, it seems
Yeah.
like. And there's so much product in there, and there's anything from food to tools and tires and just you name it in these facilities and big distribution sites. And so it's challenging sometimes when they are somewhat organized, but maybe not the way a pest guy would organize it.
Yeah.
You kind of keep the food in an area that, like foods, like your grocery stores laid out very thoughtfully. And the DCs aren't always that way, and it lends themselves to when you've got a span of 800 feet, and rodents find their way into these traps, the blender traps, and it's not always easy to catch them on the interior before it becomes such a problem, or product gets out that has a mouse in it or something and has had some damage on it. So it's challenging, and that's caused us to take a look at how we approach problems and how we solve problems sometimes too. But from a fumigation perspective, we've seen a lot of growth in those markets just because of the size of the facilities and the challenge to get them out with I'll call routine pest management services. It's tough. So,
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're
but
we're providing the insects and rodents both plenty of opportunity. Or the
yeah,
food
yeah.
industry is, that is. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're a little bit different in that, if you're targeting rodents versus insects, it's such a lower dose rate and a much more cost effective means of
Oh yeah.
control,
Oh
you
yeah.
know. So it's a matter of perspective as to how the customer looks at fumigation. But
Yeah.
I think a very viable and economic solution to sometimes a pretty challenging problem. They can be really, really brand damaging to a customer.
Oh yeah, that's a huge deal too, especially in this modern society we live in. Everything is on social media these days, and it's so easy for the smallest thing to become viral on social media. So
Yeah,
brand protection has become even more important, I'd say, in the last 10 years, 20 years
right,
than it ever was before.
right. And I think that part of that responsibility of, a good fumigation company is mitigate the risk for the client as well as us. I mean, that's what we do every day, right? We're handling, poisonous gases and filling buildings up with them. And it's from step one, it's all about risk mitigation, for us, how can we do this successfully without causing, problems or getting anyone hurt? And that's our objective, So
Yeah. So you mentioned growth regulators as one of the tools that we're using these days, and you talked about some cool things coming along with growth regulators and grain protectants and some other things like that. So what are some of the new products that you think are either already on the market recently or that are coming soon that you think is going to make our jobs easier or more innovative?
yeah, you guys have been pretty innovative. We've already got some cylinderized phosphine products out there on the market. I know there are some other molecules that are being looked at for larger scale applications. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how they get through, or if they're able to get through the EPA approval process, and what kinds of applications they'll be approved for. So whether it's structural or commodity or something like that. Products that are already on the market from the fumigations. I call it kind of fumigation, but it's a bit in between. It's the grain protectants. They're liquid chemicals, obviously, but it's not really part of routine IPM. So, and we're treating a commodity, tends to fall a little more on the fumigation side for us. Is treatment of the grains going into longer term storage. And I think there's hasn't been a whole lot of long term storage for us for in wheat. We used to see a lot of wheat sitting for 3, 4, 5 years, and we just don't see that anymore. So fumigation on the commodity side's lessened a little bit. I've seen a bit of an uptick thus far this year, but it's interesting to see the comparison of those products. And we're coming up with some very creative integrated systems to be able to make those products easier to use. The biggest holdup, I think, to using grain protectants was how do we apply them?
Oh yeah.
You know, an elevators, for example, don't have someone who can sit there and turn the machine on, turn it off, mix the chemical and all that. That's really not what they do. So there's some injection systems that are tied into PLCs and relays and things of that sort that can kind of automate that, and therefore making the application much more integrated with, say, dust suppression systems, oil systems, things of that nature. So, and then how that affects the downstream product flow, we'll see. It should help clean up elevators. Over time, I think we're going to see some positive results there. And, these are mild pesticides, methoprene and deltamethrin. So they're very mild and very low dose, but pretty effective. And most of the resident populations in a silo complex or end up getting dragged over into the production facility. And before long, you've got systems that are infested. And next thing you know, you're fumigating the systems and production shut down. So it will be really interesting to see how that plays out. So we've got some studies going on right now to see how that's going to work. I suspect that approach is going to be very helpful.
Yeah.
From the IPM perspective, you had talked about wanting to kind of dive into that a little bit. I just remember 5 years ago or so at a pest world, there were probably about a dozen or maybe as many as 20 different electronic monitoring devices that were remote systems. And that was going to be the new wave of rodent monitoring. There's a very limited number of those that survived,
Yeah.
but the ones that do work pretty good. And we've got quite a few of those still in the field. And even down to Bluetooth, that's a different monitoring technology, not true remote, but it's basically kind of automated the kind of mundane or repetitive task of checking a trap and place the data square on a online portal or a dashboard, or some way where you can analyze the data. Prior to that, it was pretty manual. It was manually, you can have a barcode system or whatever, but you're still doing that
Yeah.
task. So we've kind of elevated the technician a little bit, or actually a lot, from that repetitive task to being more preventative on the food safety side and looking for opportunities for exclusion, looking for precise location where we should do some sort of treatment. So it frees up time from the technician to be able to do other things and collaborate better with the customer. And whether it's remote rodent monitoring or remote insect monitoring with site trap or whatever, there's time savings there. And I think the next phase of this, and what I've seen, Ben, is deeper integrations with these systems. So we used to collect tons of data. We'd put it in one system and we give a login to the customer, and whether or not they ever went in and looked at it. Some do, some are very active and very good about it, but others are there, once, twice a year when the audit comes, they want to have their login and be ready to show off. But I think these systems, whether it's, your barcode, just standalone kind of barcode trap checking system, whether it's a remote monitoring system of some sort, a local monitoring Bluetooth, for example, whether it's a GMP tracking or something like that at your facility, facility management system of some sort. I think the future is in AI and these systems all integrating together to come up with some sort of, an overall score, if you will, whatever you want to call it, but kind of a risk cup where it tells you from a pest perspective, you're low risk. From a, foreign material or from a microbial issue with if you're integrating your swabbing program into it, I think it's going to be more holistic, and I think AI will start to drive some of the decisions that are getting made, and it will do the analytics of the data so you don't have to. It's just, okay, now it becomes a decision on what you want to do exactly. Here's two or three options and where we think the problem is. And I think these integrated systems and AI will be the future of pest management. A lot of it stems from, I think, the increase in FDA recalls and the importance of a company to be able to minimize the amount of products that get recalled and quickly identify what the problem is and put together a solution, understanding what the product flow through their facility, when this gate was open, when that product was going, what was happening at this packaging piece of packaging equipment at a given time that led to the problem. I think all those things, whether they're camera based, sensor based, data based, AI is going to be able to know all that for you a lot faster than it took 3 or 4 departments to get together and collaborate on it to find out. And you had such a large swath of a recall. It's worth the investment in that type of stuff, I think, to minimize that. And I think that's going to drive the future of what pesticides, when to do the applications, how it impacts environmental, impacts operations, and all those kinds of things. So I think that's going to be the hub of it in the future. Yeah, there'll probably be some new molecules come here and there, but I really think that's what's going to drive it.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you mentioned AI. I was actually going to ask about that specifically, so you beat me to the
Mhm.
punch. That's good. Because I agree with you. I think AI, as it advances and we start using it more and more in our industry, I think it's going to start being able to help us forecast our needs. It's going to help us be able to be more predictive on where we may run into problems based on historical data.
Right.
And I think you'll be able to feed all sorts of information into AI, temperature swings, humidity levels,
Sure.
pest captures. It's going to create an amount of traceability that we've never seen before. Well, instant traceability that we've never been able to see before. And
Yeah.
I'm excited about that for a couple of things. Number one, I think that it will make our jobs easier, which is good.
Yeah.
But it also will be able to make us able to react much faster when we do have to make some sort of a correction based on an infestation or whatever the case is, whether it's anything from a reaction that means fumigation or a wet spray insecticide or some kind of rodent control measure, or even all the way up to a product recall. I mean, to be able to do a product recall and have instantaneous access to where all of that product may have ended up and instantaneously being able to pull it. I mean, we're talking about things that could potentially save lives, I mean, because if
Oh,
that stuff is, adulterated, or if it has something in it that people may consume that may make them ill. I mean, just the ability to be able to pull that off the shelves immediately or faster. I mean, yeah, it could literally save lives.
yeah. I think that's, like I said, I think that's going to drive a lot of industries, and we're not, pest control industry is not going to be immune to the benefits of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're definitely going to see more and more integration of different systems. And because we've been innovative, I think, and we've been on the kind of the front edge of the electronic monitoring side of it, we've had to kind of piecemeal together systems to do it. And it's inevitable that these things are going to have to get together because that's the solution that the customer of the future is going to be requesting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, and if you're not doing it, somebody else is going to.
Eventually,
That's
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So you either stay innovative or you die off. That's just the
Yeah.
nature of business, not just fumigation or pest control. It's just nature of business in general.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you. You mentioned mating disruption, I think, briefly just a little bit ago, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Because I know your
Sure.
sister company, Insects Limited, works with pheromone technology. Are there any advances in pheromone technology or mating disruption or anything that you wanted to talk about?
Um, Not my area of expertise. However, I do know Insects Limited was working on a product called Moth Block, And I think I mentioned SiteTrap, but which is their camera-based, Wi-Fi-based pheromone monitoring device, which we've
Yeah.
got deployed in several different industries. It's a species specific, as you know. It's stored product moth, Indian meal moth, really is how we're using it. There are other products, out there, whether it's Allure MD, was another product that we use as well. And we do supplement that in some instances where Indian meal moth is the primary pest. The seed industry is pretty big on that. And we use that pretty effectively to minimize the amount of like foggings, for example. If you're just going to come in and try to knock down a population of moths with foggings, if you get a mating disruption program deployed early enough, you can have a really good impact on the amount of infested product that you may be putting at risk. So, and people are concerned. I think a lot of times that pheromone travels with the product or the packaging or whatever. And I know they've done some studies on that residue testing, if there's any pheromone that lasts, and it's going to draw Indian meal moth to your product while it's on the shelves. If memory serves me, I don't believe there was any issue with that. So, within a structure, that the mating disruption programs have proven to be very effective. But you're rarely dealing with just one species. So
Yeah.
you're always dealing with something else. So
Yeah.
the cigarette beetle or warehouse beetle or red or confused flower beetle, and those are really challenging. So
Yeah. And there is no mating disruption for
right,
those insects, at
right,
least yet.
and in the commodity world, you've got internal feeders, which are even they kind of are protected from grain protectants and other products. So being their immature stages are inside the kernel, three-fourths of their life spent inside the kernel. You can't see them. When if the grain looks clean, the next thing you know, you've got 20%, IDK, and you've lost,
Yeah.
a bunch of value of your commodity there, and wondering how it happened. So sometimes fumigation is, like I said, is the best decision for preserving post-harvest loss.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I definitely think that, fumigation really, in my opinion, cannot go away. It just can't because there's too many circumstances where it's going to be your best and, in my opinion, only option if you need to get really complete control over your commodity or your structure immediately. I mean,
Right.
all these other processes that we're talking about usually take time. Growth regulators, grain protectants, all that. None of that is an immediate response. Sometimes, with growth regulators, it takes one or two generations. They have to come into contact with it. And
Right.
with fumigants being gaseous in nature, it can get right down into the center mass of the commodity or the structure, and it can
Hmm.
kill all life stages, within a few hours in some cases. So I think there are so many opportunities where fumigation is needs to be the first choice, or at least a choice. And because of that, I don't think it's ever going to go away.
Right. I think just from your, for your listeners out there, fumigation kind of gets a bad rap. A lot of times it's, the F word or whatever. But I've heard the term used interchangeable with fogging too. Like, oh, we're going to do a fumigation this weekend. It's like, no, no, we're doing a fogging this weekend. And
Yeah.
yeah, let me help you understand the difference there. And I think education, and I applaud you guys for what you've done on your website with the education training modules that you guys have put together, because of the inherent dangers with restricted use pesticides. I think that's a responsibility of registrants that not everybody takes as serious as what you guys have. So we do less public stuff. We do a lot of internal, and thank you again for being a part of our fumology training last week, where we brought in a bunch of younger baby face fumigators to have them come in and kind of learn how we do things, and that was very helpful. We appreciate your time there.
Oh yeah, no problem. Always happy to help whenever I can, and Training and education is always important to me, and it's important to our organization, just like it is important to your organization as well. And I commend you for, taking the opportunity and taking the time to make sure that your employees are educated on all of this stuff.
But I remember receiving a fumigation license and thinking, oh my gosh, legally I can go out and apply methyl bromide. At the time was kind of the structural fumigant of choice. And I was not prepared. I was 20 years old, wet behind the ears. I was not prepared to go out and responsibly do that. So I think it's somewhat on industry, somewhat on regulatory to make sure that we're putting competent, trained, educated people out in the field doing this kind of thing, or inevitably something bad's going to happen, which jeopardizes the lifespan, if you will, of a molecule when it gets scrutinized like that. We've all heard of tragic stories that happen, and
Yeah.
we need to do our diligence, and I feel like we do a pretty good job of internal training.
Yeah, and I'm
But
glad. I'm sorry. I'm glad you mentioned the your experience with getting your license and then saying, oh well, now I'm legally allowed to do this, but maybe not feeling quite as equipped. And I felt the same way after I got my fumigation license.
hmm
I mean, I was licensed 21, 22 years ago, and I can tell you the way that we fumigate today is vastly different than the way we fumigated 22 years ago when I got my license. So,
right,
and there's
right,
continuing education hours and requirements to maintain your state certification, of course. But if you're not careful, you can fall kind of behind the times, and you can end up inadvertently breaking the law, I guess, because you're not paying attention to label changes, law changes, regulatory requirement changes, and things of that nature. Because this industry does change, and it changes drastically, and sometimes it changes pretty often. So yeah,
hmm
if, I mean, I would caution anybody, if you had got your fumigation license 20, 25, 30 years ago, please educate yourself, because it's
yeah.
it's not the same as it was then, for sure.
Well, I think we used to do fumigation training, and we would come in and recertify people for end users, and
Yeah.
there are very few end users who are not for hire, meaning they just work for their company or they apply for their company. There's very few people out there that still do that. I think a lot of companies have kind of divested from that liability and hired a professional fumigation company,
Yeah.
which is good because we've seen a lot of things when we come in and we kind of assess what they were doing with an in-house program. It's like, ooh, maybe we're going to take a fresh approach to this, or a different approach, because we're not going to do that
Yeah,
kind
and
of thing. I'm not knocking on them, but if they've had the same guy doing it for 30 plus years, like you said, things evolve, things change, labels change, monitoring has certainly improved. So a lot of that stuff needs to change and evolve over time, and we can be more efficient and more effective with the limited molecules that we have. So
well,
yeah,
and the state certifications have to be so broad. They have to try to capture as much of a broad range as they can, because they don't know what that potential fumigator is going to kind of drill into and work on.
yeah,
And so a lot of the states, they have to keep it broad in a certain respect, especially when it comes to fumigation. And so it's kind of left up to the fumigator to do any kind of continuing education past that, to really drill down and get better at whatever molecule they're going to be primarily working with. And I mean, you're absolutely right. For every time that I've walked into a facility and I've met a fumigator that is doing, in my opinion, everything just about as right as you can, I'll walk into another facility and I run into a fumigator that's doing a bunch of things wrong. And when I
hmm
ask them, where'd you learn that? They almost always say, well, this is how the last guy did it. And he's the one that
hmm
showed me. And
hmm
well, have you read the label? Well, yeah, I leafed through it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's always a concern, but I always try to stress to people as much as I can, continue that education. There's never a point where you stop learning how to do what we do, simply because, again, like we've talked about over and over again during our conversation, we continue to innovate. There's always something new to learn, because that innovation never stops.
yeah. Agreed. The bugs, they find a way.
Yeah.
So
Well, the bugs are pretty innovative too.
yeah, yeah, they
They
find a
find a way
way.
to survive too.
They find a way.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
Yeah. Well, hey, I only have one question left for you, Jeff,
Yeah.
and it's a question that I ask. I always ask a version of this to everybody when I have them on the podcast. What kind of advice would you give a new fumigator or some kind of a new pest control operator about the future of our industry?
If you are getting into fumigation today, it's important to have a good mentor and someone that believes in the kind of things that I think you and I mutually agree upon is important. Safety, certainly, efficacy, risk mitigation, those type of things that doesn't come inherent to everyone. So I'm not saying everyone should be a fumigator, but those who kind of like the business and those who want to learn more about it, if they seek someone out that is like-minded and as you and I are about, and a lot of other good people in the industry, to kind of mentor them a little bit and show a lot of interest, educate yourself on the fumigants and the dangers and dosages and just studies from USDA, ARS have helped me immensely. Frank Arthur, Deanna Sheff, James Campbell. I'm going to forget a bunch, but
All great
anyway,
people.
yeah, Dirk Meyer, all these guys that have been in the industry, Paul Fields, and just tons of them that I was very fortunate to learn from. And if you can educate yourself broadly enough to be able to apply the science to the actual physical act of applying the gas, monitoring, and I think there is a great future in it, and one that you're going to be a part of a pretty small and elite group of people who can do this and do it well. And I think there's a lot of job security in that. And I've always found that the sky's the limit for people who want to put the effort into training and educating themselves and understanding it. And I just think there's a lot of job security. As we mentioned, the pests are pretty dynamic. They're innovative as well, and so there are always going to be those challenges there. I mean, I still run across things all the time that I'm like, oh, that's haven't seen that one before. That's a new one.
Yeah.
So, that would be the advice I would give to anyone looking to get into it today is seek someone who can mentor you, who has a pretty profound understanding of all those kinds of things that we mentioned, the safety of it, the efficacy, the pest biology. So you may have to go different places to get that, but that leaves you a pretty well-rounded person. I think in this, just be patient as you come in. You may be frustrated, not knowing everything and maybe having some failures along the way, but that's a great way to learn as well. Certainly keep those failures minimized by working with those who know. You don't want to be a safety compromise or something. That would be the best advice, because I think coming into it nowadays, especially in kind of the skilled trades, I'd put us in that category maybe.
Oh yeah.
People who have the skill set like that and the mindset to be able to talk the talk and then walk the walk. Those people are pretty rare, and there's a real bright future in fumigation pest management for people who can set themselves apart like that.
I could not have said that better myself. This industry has treated me wonderfully, and it sounds like it's treated you pretty wonderfully too, which is great. And most of the people that work in this industry, they never leave it. They stay for their entire careers because
Yeah,
it really is a terrific industry with a lot of opportunity.
a lot of good people.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, that's all I had today. I really appreciate you taking some
Yeah,
time
man.
to answer some questions and have a conversation.
Always good to talk to you again. Enjoyed seeing you last week, and appreciate all that you guys do for the industry. Certainly this podcast, and the general education stuff that you guys do, and the great products that you manufacture. So good service to the industry.
Well, thank you. The feeling's very
Yep,
mutual. A lot of respect.
appreciate it. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
I want to thank Jeff for helping us see the path we'll all take into the future of stored product pest control. The challenges we'll face are going to be tough, but as always, we will be ready for them. And that's it for Season 5 of Dagish America Presents. I sure hope you enjoyed listening to this season just as much as I did hosting it. I always learn so much from our guests, and I hope you do as well. And remember, if you have a question you'd like for us to answer, feel free to email us at podcast@dagishamerica.com. You can also find us on our website at dagishamerica.com or on all of the main social media outlets. And so, until next season, I'm Ben Harrell, and I hope you have a safe and terrific day.